Good evening, everybody. Good evening. If you could all find a seat, and if you would, this is very un-Episcopalian, if you could all move forward. And the reason for that is that when it comes to asking questions, it will help for your questions to be heard on the live stream. I think I should congratulate you all for making it out this evening, but I recognize most of you. Welcome. Welcome to our 3 visitors in particular. I don't think there are any hospitality announcements because we're going to do everything in here. So the food is here and the restrooms are there, and it's as easy as that. So let us pray. The Lord be with you. O God of unchangeable power and eternal light, look favorably on your whole church, that wonderful and sacred mystery. By the effectual working of your providence, carry out in tranquility the plan of salvation. Let the whole world see and know that things which were cast down are being raised up, and things which had grown old are being made new, and that all things are being brought to their perfection by him through whom all things were made, your Son, Jesus Christ our Lord, who lives and reigns with you in the unity of the Holy Spirit, one God, for ever and ever. Amen.
Good evening. I thank you all for coming this evening. My name is Mary Amato. I chair the Transition Committee. We've worked a long time for this time to come, and we're so excited to present the candidates for our new bishop, the Reverend Canon David Pfaff, the Reverend Canon Audrey Sparks, and the Reverend Dr. Douglas Sparks. I got it right tonight. Our original intention was to divide you into 3 groups, is why you have the color code on your name tag. But since we're such a small group, we will do it in 1 group setting. And the order of the candidates will be Douglas Sparks, David Pfaff, Audrey Scanlon. I've asked each one of them to give you just a little bio of themselves, and so we'll call forward for that. If small group, if you feel comfortable doing it from the floor, that's fine. So, oh, that's right, you do need to do it from the camera. Thank you. Okay. David, do you want to go first? Or Doug, do you want to go first?
Grace and peace be with you. It's a blessing to be able to gather with you this evening. My name is Doug Sparks, and I serve as the rector of St. Luke's Episcopal Church in the Episcopal Diocese, now known as the Episcopal Church, made changes by our Bishop Brian Pryor of Minnesota. And it's a blessing to have all of you here this evening, and it's also a blessing to have been traveling these last few days with the members of the transition team. And I also want to extend a word of thanks to all those who've been part of the search committee and everyone else who's been part of this wonderful process that's finally brought us to this time and place. It's a blessing to be here with you and with my colleagues in ministry. I have the blessing to be married to Dana Worth Sparks. We've been married, we're now in our 27th year of marriage, married December 28th of 1988. 3 of the greatest blessings of our life are our 3 children. We have a daughter, Christina, who's 23. She lives in Boulder, Colorado, and is currently working full-time as a nanny, taking care of fraternal twins who were born to a couple in October of last year. So she's learning what that life is like, as you can well appreciate. We have a son, our oldest son, Graham, who is 20. He is a junior at the University of Wisconsin, Oshkosh, and studying poli-sci. He ran in a primary for governor of the city of Oshkosh, mayor of the city of Oshkosh. He has greater heights and sights in mind, obviously. And we have a son who's 17, Gavin, who's a senior at Mayo High School, and he's been left home alone. So pray for him. Thanks to the gift of technology and Facebook and other social media platforms, lots of people are checking in on him. And so we're able to be here because we've got people who love us and love him and are caring for him in our absence. One of the things I'd like to also say, Dana and I share some things with many of you, particularly if you live here in State College, and that's because we are fans of the Wisconsin Badgers in the Big Ten, and we live in Minnesota, another Big Ten state, so we are Panthers.
Well, good evening to all of you, and thank you for coming out. I just agree so much with what Mary Amato said and with what Doug said. We're really grateful that you have come to spend this time with us. We are having a wonderful week and are so grateful to the Transition Committee and particularly to our driver, David, who, in this dodgy weather has done an amazing job getting us where we needed to be, when we needed to be there safely. So we're grateful for that. I'm a priest in the Diocese of Milwaukee, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. But let me back up. I was actually born in England, although I do not read the service with the beautiful accent that the incumbent here does. I grew up in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, which is a town not unlike State College. So I always feel good when I'm in a college town. It just kind of feels like home. For the last 15 years, though, we have been in Milwaukee. The first 7.5 years of that time, I was the rector of St. Mark's Church, and then went to work on the bishop's staff as the canon to the ordinary, that funny job that has no clear definition, but is a wonderful opportunity to work with and for the bishop, helping in his ministry, in our case it's a his, but not always, ministry of oversight in the diocese, which is really a ministry of service. Our diocesan income has been on the decline in the Diocese of Milwaukee for a number of years. We are not unique in that. And we needed to downsize the size of our staff to stay within the budget. And I think the right decision was made that the canon to the ordinary's position needed to go. So I was not written into the 2015 budget. Very much I am totally in agreement with that. So I really am in a time of discernment and listening hard for the movement of the Holy Spirit and God's leading, and I'm grateful to be here. I've been married for 26 years to Emily Vailfath, who's sitting over there in the far corner of the front pew. We have, Emily is a licensed clinical social worker in Milwaukee, and is also just one credit shy of finishing a master's degree in sacred theology from the Central Baptist Theological Seminary, which is the American Baptist Seminary in Kansas City, which has a satellite campus in Milwaukee. That's a mouthful. We have 3 children as well. Our son Andrew, who is 21, just turned 21, is a junior English major at the University of the South in Sewanee, Tennessee. His sister Helen, who is 18, surprised us all last year by saying that she wanted to go to Sewanee as well. So we have 2 children on the Holy Mountain, or at least we trust they are there. We also have a 10-year-old 5th grader named Edward, who is back in Milwaukee with friends and seems to be surviving without us. Edward's big news is that he just was admitted to the jazz band in his school. And he's a trumpet player and very excited about that. So, very glad to be here. Thank you for your welcome.
Good evening. My name's Audrey Scanlon, and I currently serve the Episcopal Church as canon for mission collaboration and congregational life in the Episcopal Church in Connecticut. It's great to be here with all of you tonight, and this week so far has been just amazing. I decided yesterday that we need to revise the canons of the Diocese of Central Pennsylvania so that we could elect 3 bishops. My colleagues, Doug and David, are so impressive, and we have had such a wonderful time with their spouses and on the bus with the transition committee and our shepherds. It's been just a wonderful week. So I would encourage you to consider that at your election next Saturday. My husband, Glenn, has been with us up until just this morning, and he sends his greetings to you. He has had to return to Connecticut, where he only accrues so many vacation days at a time. So his boss is expecting him at United Healthcare to show up tomorrow morning. He did text me this afternoon and say that he arrived home and found 6 inches of fresh snow in the driveway and a leaking bathroom ceiling. So I'm kind of glad to be here, to be honest with you. We have 3 children as well. Somehow you've managed to select 3 candidates with 3 children each. Our 3, we have 2 girls and a son in the middle. Our 2 girls, Emma and Harriet, both live in Sonoma, California. They work at a residential treatment facility and parochial school for troubled adolescent boys. And our son, Bill, is a musician in Portland, Maine. So those are our 3. I am humbled to be a part of this process. And I think we were encouraged to reflect on things that we would like for you to know about us and things that you might take home with you about us at the end of the evening. And the one thing that I would really want you to remember about me is that I consider myself a disciple of Jesus Christ. I identify myself as a child of God, as a disciple of Jesus, and as somebody who counts on the Holy Spirit showing up every day to direct me in the work that I do. So I'm very excited about this process and about talking with you more about the church. Thank you.
As David and Audrey prepare to leave us for a few minutes, I'm going to remind you all to turn off your cell phones, please. Our moderator this evening is Joan Beresford, and she will explain the process that we have developed for the question and answer segment of this evening.
Good evening. I am Joan Beresford from St. James, Mansfield, and I am the moderator for this occasion. Again, I remind you to please turn off your cell phones. Questions have been solicited from around the diocese, and each candidate will answer 3 of those questions given to them. The candidate will then answer one of his or her choosing. This will take 28 minutes, and we will have 7 minutes for questions from the floor. Please focus on those questions that relate to being a bishop of Central Pennsylvania. There will be a 5-minute break between sessions as candidates move to another room. It's my great pleasure to introduce our first candidate, the Reverend Dr. Douglas Sparks.
Can I read the first question since I'm...
Sure.
Okay. The first question that each of us have been prepared to answer is this question. We are a diverse diocese with parishes ranging from fairly large to pretty small and urban to rural and somewhat young to quite aged. What specific skills do you bring that you'll use to help us grow our ministries and sustain financial viability? Early in my ministry, I've been ordained 32 years. Early in my ministry, I was asked to celebrate a funeral, a celebration of a Christian burial for a dear friend of ours. His mother died, and she was raised in the Baptist church, and she had a Bible, and their children handed me the Bible, and I began going through the Bible and just saw scripture verse after scripture verse in the Old Testament and New Testament just lined under. And it gave me the opportunity then to speak about her, and particularly about her faith, when I was preaching at her funeral. So I left there committed to identifying in the scriptures my life verses. And I'd like to share one of those life verses with you. It comes from Luke chapter 22, beginning in the 24th verse. An argument broke out among the disciples over which one of them should be regarded as the greatest. But Jesus said to them, the kings of the Gentiles rule over their subjects, and those in authority over them call friends of the people. But that's not the way it will be with you. Instead, the greatest among you must become like a person of lower status, and the leader like a servant. So which one is greater, the one who is seated at table or the one who serves at the table? Isn't it the one who is seated at table? But I am among you as one who serves. That particular scripture text is etched into a patent that someone gave me June 2nd, 1984, when I was ordained to the priesthood. I'm not sure that you all know what we've been up to this week, so I want to go quickly through our itinerary. On Monday, we visited the diocesan office, St. Stephen's, All Saints in Hershey, St. Luke's in Mount Joy. We had a wonderful lunch there. And then we visited sort of the rim congregations in Lancaster, convocation. And then we stopped and visited St. Edward's in Lancaster and had a wonderful conversation and visit with Stephen Casey. And then ended up at St. Thomas in Lancaster for the first walkabout conversation. Tuesday, we went to St. Andrews in Shippensburg and then had a wonderful lunch there. And we had the privilege of touring the Episcopal home there, which is just a fascinating and wonderful ministry of this diocese. Today we drove by, but had a chance to visit with Duncan at Mount Calvary in Camp Hill, and then had a wonderful lunch at St. Mark's in Lewistown. All we seem to do is stop and eat, as a matter of fact. And then we're here tonight with all of you. The experience I bring is with me to this possible ministry is that I've had the privilege of serving in a congregation like that in other parts of the Episcopal Church and in the Anglican Communion. As the dean of a cathedral in Wellington, New Zealand, I've had the privilege of serving in a rural congregation, 5-point ministry that I did three services on one weekend and 2 services on another. I served as a rector of an inner city congregation. I served as a rector of a suburban congregation. I've had the challenge of sitting in a rural congregation as a ministry developer, knowing that as we looked at preparing the next year's budget, my compensation was the largest part of the budget, and yet faithful people said, we want you to stay here and we'll do whatever we can to make that happen. I've served in a college town as well, Whitewater, St. Luke's, where that very conversation took place. If elected to serve as your bishop, I would invite every faith community to engage in what I've come to call a missional conversation. And the missional conversation is around these 4 questions. First, What is God up to in your neighborhood? What's God up to in your neighborhood? Secondly, and this comes from the appreciative inquiry process that I was introduced to back in the late 90s, what gifts do we have among us, and how might we share them with others? Thirdly, what particular challenges do we face, and what resources do we need to face those challenges? And fourthly, and I believe this is really the most important question that we as Episcopalians are going to be facing for the next century. Who are our possible partners in this particular ministry that we want to engage in? I'd hope to be able to do that in the convocation structure, so that as we begin to listen to one another, we'll begin to discover all of the wonderful things, from faith formation experiences to outreach opportunities to the Jubilee Ministry Center that was in Lewistown today, all of those wonderful things. These experiences have also taught me this affirmation that I want to say quite clearly this evening. Every faith community, regardless of size, ASA, budget, location, is valued and valuable. And in my opinion, needs to be resourced and supported by the bishop and the bishop's staff as they discern mutually and together what the sustainable ministry will be in that context, because contexts vary and change from place to place to place. But the bishop's primary responsibility, along with the staff, is to assist in resourcing those faith communities so that they can discern the affordable ministry and what that looks like in context. And finally, I've been taught by some wonderful people. I've had the privilege of serving with wardens who taught me so many things about what it means to be a leader in the church. I've had clergy colleagues who have been my senior and my junior as curates, who've taught me as much as I've been able to mentor and share with them, which is an enormous blessing to me. I've chaired the Department of Congregational Development. I have a certification in the Advanced Congregational Development from the Seabury Institute. I've served on the Finance Committee as treasurer of the diocese. So I know all of those kinds of challenges and issues that we face. And I would hope to bring all of those experiences and skills to the service of you in this place. The second question is, how would you strengthen communication between the diocese and congregations, among congregations, and between you as bishop and the clergy? Here's a song I learned this summer. Take, oh, take me as I am. Summon forth what I shall be. Set your seal upon my heart and learn from me. I learned that song on Iona at the Iona community this summer when I was part of a discernment leadership conference. And I also got reintroduced to the value and gift of poetry. And I was introduced to some poems I'd never heard before, and this is one of them that really touched my heart that I want to share with you. It's entitled Deep Listening by John Fox. When someone deeply listens to you, it's like holding out a dented cup you've had since childhood and watching it fill up with cold, fresh water. When it balances on the top of the rim, you're understood. When it overflows and touches your skin, you are loved. When someone deeply listens to you, the room where you stay starts a new life, and the place where you wrote your first poem begins to blow in your mind's eye. It's as if gold has been discovered. When someone deeply listens to you, your bare feet are on the earth, and the beloved land that seemed distant is now at home within you. This process we've been about is a process of deeply listening to the the presence and voices of God in our lives and in your life. I believe the ministry of the bishop is primarily a ministry of being present and listening. I made this commitment to the persons who were part of the search committee that I would commit myself to being present 1 week per month in each of the convocations to engage in those missional conversations I spoke about just a few moments ago. And again, what's God up to in our neighborhood, what's going well, what needs our attention, and who are our possible partners. I want to meet with the ordained and lay leaders of each of those convocations and faith communities to get a sense of what's going on and to look for connections and for patterns that might be replicated in other faith communities that sometimes only by word of mouth people can share. I'm also committed to transparency. I've been an advocate for that as a presbyter, as a priest in the Diocese of Minnesota and Milwaukee, and I believe transparency, particularly around finances and funding, all of those things have to be really very clear and forthright in terms of the way we make decisions. And I believe that's an important service of any bishop. I'd like to address the word diocese because I think diocese gets blamed for lots of things. Every baptized person in all 66 faith communities in the Diocese of Central Pennsylvania, every clergy person, every lay leader, every lay professional is the diocese. There's no such thing. I mean, obviously there's an incorporation that we say is the diocese, but every person who's made a decision to be a faithful disciple, follower of Jesus in the faith communities in Central Pennsylvania is the diocese. So I think what's really being asked here is how might a communication be better or enhanced between the bishop and the bishop's staff and faith communities. And so that's a real important thing to sort of clear up. So we live as the Episcopal Church in Minnesota. You live as the Episcopal Church in Central Pennsylvania. I'm also committed to using all the platforms that are available to us in social media. Believe it or not, as if I don't have enough time serving as the rector of a congregation, program site congregation, in my late nights before I went to sleep, I visited every website in the Diocese of Central Pennsylvania. I looked at all of them because that's really important. It's a communication tool. I've also visited, but not yet friended, for obvious reasons, the Central Pennsylvania Facebook page. I keep an eye on those kinds of things. I've read the journals that are available to all of us on the website from 2013, 2012, so that I could get a chance to get to know you and know the things that are important to you. That's another way of being in communication. Lastly, I was gifted by this comment by a man named Chris Jarvis, who's a member of our faith community in Rochester. He said, Doug, if elected to serve as their bishop in Central Pennsylvania, you'll have the privilege of being a pastor to pastors. And I believe the 32 years of ministry that I've had and the challenges and the joys and the struggles have prepared me for the servant ministry that you'd call me to if I were elected. Dana and I want to mention, Dana teleworks for the Mayo Clinic as the executive news producer for the Mayo Clinic News Network and all of the social media along with her team. And while she's able to be here, we never get to spend a week just by ourselves. It's great to have her here. I want to say that Dana and I experienced several miscarriages in our life, and it was wonderful to have the bishop call on his way home and say, "Can I come and visit you?" And he came into our house, prayed with us, cried with us. He knew our joys and our sorrows. My hope would be to meet regularly with the gifted clergy, deacons, and presbyters in the diocese, to open the scriptures with them, to pray, to offer opportunities for retreat, to listen to their stories, to get to know their individual concerns, to know where they live and to know their families and their households and their circumstances. These are, and really what challenges they face, so that if I'm called to serve here, I'd be able to respond positively and with some knowledge about how best to serve and meet your needs. The third question is, what have been your experiences with vocational deacons, and how do you envision using the deacons for serving parishes and or the diocese? I've had the privilege of having wonderful and challenging and niggling diaconal ministry in every faith community I've served in, except as the dean of the cathedral in Wellington. Diaconal ministry wasn't really a part of that diocese at this point. But I'd like to tell you how the story began. I was serving at St. Luke's in Whitewater, the college town I told you about, and Bishop Roger White called me up and said, "Doug, I've got a gift for you." I said, "Well, what's the gift?" He said, "Deacon Mary Meisner needs to be moved because we're having a pastoral transition in the congregation she's serving in, and I'd like to assign her to St. Luke's." And I said, "But Bishop White, you know this congregation, and they've never had an ordained woman serve in this congregation." He said, "I know, but you'll take care of that." So I met with our vestry, and I said, "Bishop White would like to have Mary assigned here. She's a geriatric nurse practitioner." And we then talked about it, and we looked at the assets and gifts that she would bring, and also the challenges that we might face. And we identified, the leaders of that congregation and I identified 3 persons that we knew would be upset if she were called to serve among us. Not because they didn't like her as a person, but they were fundamentally opposed to women being ordained. So at the end of the vestry meeting, I said, "Well, we've made this decision. What would you like me to do?" And they said, "Would you go visit each of those persons individually?" So I did. And all 3 of them voiced their opposition. But what was most important is that a person who'd been quite vocal at the end said to me, "You know what? I'm not supportive of this, but in all my years, you're the first priest who ever came to talk to me about it." 15 years later, we visited that congregation. And he came up to me and said he had been diagnosed with cancer, and he was near his death. He came up to me and said, "I can't tell you how grateful I am for Mary's ministry." And she was by his bedside when he took his last breath and died. I had the privilege of serving at St. Matthias in Waukesha with 2 deacons, and then discerned a 3rd deacon while I was there. Dick Fox had a PhD in education, taught for the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. He had a passion and a concern and a commitment for caring for the mentally ill who live in Waukesha City and County. And he called our faith community and me to an attention to that and to come to appreciate what living with mental illness is, what that's like and what a challenge it is. At the same time, Deacon Chuck Zellermeyer had a commitment to making sure that St. Matthias became the place where feeding ministry happened for all cooperating congregations in Waukesha County. They still serve, now 20 years on, a meal Monday through Friday every day of the year except weekends and Christmas and New Year's. When I came to serve in the Diocese of Minnesota, Bishop Jelinek called and said, "Doug, it's my policy not to assign deacons for their first few years of ministry back to the congregation where they were raised up. And I'd like to assign Phyllis Kuntz, Deacon Phyllis Kuntz, to St. Luke's." Now, Rochester is a large city, but it's out in rural Minnesota, away from Minneapolis and St. Paul. And she lived quite a number of miles away, and there aren't a lot of congregations close to one another. So being a deacon assigned to a congregation 20 or 30 miles away is a big challenge. but she came to be among us and serve among us. And her particular passions were a commitment to serving and visiting those who were in the federal medical facility, and then also calling the members of our faith community to join her in caring for women who had been incarcerated and who were being released back into the community without a lot of resources, and called us as people of faith to support these women in their need for resources as they re-enter. Every single one of those individuals challenged me to live out my life as a Christian, to take my baptismal covenant seriously as a servant. So my life and the faith communities I've served in have been richly blessed and enormously changed by the value of and presence of deacons. I understand that Bishop Geppert, I was told Bishop Geppert and the Archdeacon here have been in the process of revising a customary to make sure there's some clarity about a diaconal ministry and what that looks like in each faith community. I have no idea how everyone feels about that, but what I can say is this. I believe having clarity about diaconal ministry and deacons' relationships to a faith community is a good thing, because we should not allow ourselves to do ministry on the cheap. We should not take advantage of deacons. We shouldn't say, well, we can take care of this by just having him or her cover for us. We need to have some clarity about that and honor their gifts, many of whom work full-time jobs and then offer themselves to faith communities for the particular ministries they call us to. It's also clear to me that diaconal ministry is a beloved ministry in the Diocese of Central Pennsylvania, and I would make a commitment to meeting regularly with the College of Deacons on a regular basis so that I could come to know what their needs are, what your needs are. I know we have several deacons here this evening, so that the diocese could resource you and assist in your continuing and ongoing formation.
At this point, Dr. Sparks will choose a question of his own and answer it from the list of the 10 that we provided to him.
You've heard the phrase, it's easier to get forgiveness than permission? Are you all familiar with that phrase? So, we live in a democracy, and there's not another context where a clergy person has the luxury of arriving someplace and telling people, I'll answer this question, but I won't answer that question, or choose which questions I'm going to respond to. So what I'd like to do, there are questions 4 through 10, and we have, how many minutes do we have left? 14 minutes? So I'm going to list, just read questions 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and at the end of each time I read the first question, just raise your hands. Who'd like me to answer that question? And since we live in a democracy, the largest number of hands will get answered first. Okay? So question 4. How has your previous ministry experiences prepared you to serve as Bishop of the Diocese of Central Pennsylvania? Question 5. Now that same-gender marriages, same-sex marriages are legal in Pennsylvania, would you as bishop support the clergy officiating and performing such marriages? Okay. That's okay. Question 6. What ways do you see the Diocese of Central Pennsylvania being more involved prayerfully and spiritually in our communities? Question 7. Gifts of the Holy Spirit, and what gifts do you possess? Okay. 8. What brings you the most joy? Okay. 9. Involvement. How would you involve and encourage our youth in their daily life and ministry in the church and community? Yeah, okay. And question 10, when have you experienced lay participation working best in parish and diocese? So, let me do this. I'd like to answer the question 5 regarding same-gender marriage and question 9, youth ministry. Is that fair? We got time for that. All right? Let me say this. I've read and am in support of the policy that was adopted by and implemented by Bishop Baxter after conversation and consultation regarding the blessing of same-gender unions. I've been a deputy to General Convention 4 times, and I was at General Convention 2009 and 2012 as a deputy from Minnesota. I voted for "I will bless you and you will be a blessing." In the Diocese of Minnesota at that point, as is true also in Pennsylvania, same-gender marriage was not legal. So that all changed in the Diocese of Minnesota in May of 2013. And on August 1st, same-gender marriage in Minnesota became legal. And we as a diocese had to be about a conversation regarding how we were going to respond. As the rector of St. Luke's, I'd engaged our faith community for a period of 18 months studying the question of same-gender marriage and "I will bless you and you will be a blessing" in preparation for the General Convention. So in May of 2013, I said, we need to have a conversation about this because we have at least 2 same-gender couples who've been faithful pledging members of our congregation who've been waiting for us to make some sort of decision. So after a period of 8 months, February the 10th, 2014, I remember dates, but this date was really important. After 8 months of working together with the vestry and wardens of our congregation, we came to a consensus about adopting a marriage policy. And we now have that policy, and you can read it. It's quite similar to the policy that you've adopted here in central Pennsylvania. It's on our website. And we made that decision unanimously by consensus. Wasn't an up or down vote. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. And I've had the privilege of witnessing 3 same-gender marriages. So that's where I stand. I have no idea what steps have been taken since the blessing policy has been implemented, but I also want to say we were given this hat with the Episcopal logo, and I brought 2 hats with me. I'm a Green Bay Packer fan. Yeah, I know. But it gets more challenging. Just consider my life. I live in Minnesota Viking land. And I want to say this with a sense of seriousness, but also engaging your appreciation for a sense of humor. I am not under any illusion that every person in every faith community is of one mind regarding same-gender blessing or same-gender marriage. But what I am committed to, and I've given evidence to that, is that I'm committed to having the conversation and honoring faith communities in the process of mutually discerning how best to respond to the question in each context. Let me talk about youth ministry. I've had the privilege to serve in camping ministry on diocesan camp boards. I was excited to read the journal report from the youth ministry and saw that there's an intentional relationship between the Episcopal Church in central Pennsylvania and the ELCA at Camp Mount Luther. Is that correct? And I've been in camping ministry since the early 90s. Some of our kids' best experiences in Christian formation and faith formation has been at camps. And so I love that ministry and would want to be present and supportive of that ministry. I also think it's important to make sure that young people invite the bishop when they're meeting, rather than expecting young persons to show up when the bishop's visiting. So in that intention of spending a week in a convocation at a time, arranging to meet with and gather with young persons on their terms in their particular faith community. I also was excited about happening going on here. I've been involved in happening in one diocese and also Teens Encounter Christ in another diocese, and I've served on staff as well as our children have participated in both in terms of as being participants in the retreat and also on the team. So those are all wonderful opportunities that I think that are valuable. But particularly given the context of meeting here in State College, I think young adults are sometimes the most missed and unlistened to persons in our faith communities. And campus ministry and inviting young persons to be involved in our life as they are able to is really an important thing for us to do. And I know that there's been some initiatives here in the mission enterprise zones to sort of focus on that ministry, particularly here at St. Andrews. Lastly, and I want to talk about this in a serious way, when we arrived at St. Luke's in Rochester, we were invited to revise our bylaws. And those bylaws were revised to intentionally include a young person who was confirmed, electing them to a one-year term on the vestry with both voice and vote. And we also elect an alternate because, as you can well appreciate, and there's some young people here, as you can well appreciate, their lives are often hugely busy with various activities, sports commitments, academic commitments, and so we've had the pleasure of having at least one young person out of the two present when the vestry meets so that they can be honored and be included in the decision-making of our congregation. And I'll add by saying that consensus process that I referred to back regarding the same-gender blessing, Allison and our son Gavin were part of that consensus process. They gave voice to St. Luke's, the leadership of St. Luke's, making a decision to say yes to establishing a marriage policy where persons in same-gender relationships who want to be married and in opposite-gender relationships who want to be married could be honored. And it was one of the most moving experiences of my life as a priest to see the hard and wonderful work they did and to know that one of our children was a part of that decision-making.
At this point, we will offer an opportunity for you to ask questions. We ask that you stand and recite your name, please, and to speak in a loud voice so that everyone can hear. Please keep your questions to the issues of the bishop of our diocese. And we have 14 minutes for these questions. Oh, just 4? Oh, okay, 11 minutes.
4 minutes left.
Okay.
Please let us know your name. I'm Mrs. Schoonmaker, clergy in this diocese. I'm very interested in your comments about having to go through this 18-month process once same-gender marriage was legal in your state. To the best of my knowledge, once this was legal in this state, and I don't think that happened during the tenure of Bishop Baxter, with all due respect. All it amounted to the best of my knowledge, was the clergy council was asking Bishop Gephardt, and who was rather surprised and said, "That's the law of the land." And we said, "What liturgy should be used?" And he said, "We have a perfectly fine liturgy right in our Book of Common Prayer." And in fact, we have had one same-gender marriage in this church. I'm wondering about what drove you to the idea that we had to have a long conversation before, once it was the law of the land, not to incorporate it into your own church.
What led me to saying we ought to have a long process of discernment before we just implement decisions about marrying same-gender persons in our faith communities?
Yes, and the fact that you implied that there were two separate same-gender versus...
Certainly. Well, the Episcopal Church of General Convention adopted "I will bless you and you will be a blessing." It's a blessing right. And the enabling resolution of General Convention said that in those dioceses where marriage is legal, the wording could be changed in consultation with the chancellor of the diocese to accommodate to the language of the state for clergy persons to witness and bless. But all of this was done with the complete authorization only of the diocesan bishop. So that's what the enabling resolution was at General Convention. So when we came home back to Minnesota, we'd been talking and preparing our delegates and faith community members about the document for "I will bless you and you will be a blessing," the blessing text. But marriage, same-gender marriage, wasn't legal in Minnesota until a year later almost. So we'd been talking about it, but once it became legal, I believed that our faith community had to come to some decision about whether we wanted to be a community who would marry same-gender persons, because that's not a decision. The General Convention did not make a decision saying every faith community has to marry same-gender persons. It's a decision about discernment regarding diocese and then also faith community by faith community. And I felt it was important to be a part of a process of discernment rather than saying, you'll do this whether you like it or not.
Part of, I guess, being bishop is you're sort of the physical representation of our faith. So can you speak about any interfaith experience you have, or working with people of faiths or different faith congregations, Abrahamic and non-Abrahamic, and different Christian things? Because I'm assuming when people think the Episcopal Church, they're going to see you as the figurehead. So can you speak to these different groups?
Yes. Yes. What experiences have I had with persons of other faith traditions, given the fact that bishops serve as a visible sign of the diocese in relationship with other interfaith communities? Is that what your question is? Yes. I've lived and served in various communities. When I was the dean of the cathedral in Wellington, I was the first dean in the Anglican Church in that province to invite persons of various faiths, but particularly persons who are of the Muslim faith to the cathedral for an intentional prayer time prior to the invasion of Iraq. Because I felt it was important to gather persons of all faiths to be present and prayerfully consider and pray for all of those involved in this important decision-making process. And it was the first time any imam had been inside the Wellington Cathedral. I believe, I'm in my heart of hearts, I'm both committed ecumenically. In every faith community I've been a part of, I've looked for intentional relationships with our Christian brothers and sisters, particularly the ELCA and the Moravian Church. We have 2 Moravian pastors who are members of our staff at St. Luke's in Rochester. Also in Rochester, we've begun to meet regularly with our sister rabbi at B'nai Israel and a woman who's now called together Muslims in Rochester to have intentional conversations about interfaith dialogue, given the challenges that Muslim persons are facing sometimes in various communities. So I certainly am very committed to being ecumenically and interfaith minded, and have had that experience in my own life. Thank you. Thank you very much. Blessings to you.
Thank you for your questions. We will have a 5-minute break while the next candidate returns to the nave. Doug turned around. Scoot over. Except I don't want to be in the booth. Come back here and sit down. Because I thought it was a little awkward.
Right.
Thank you for your patience. Would you please be seated? It is my extreme honor to present to you the Reverend Canon David A. Pfaff. First question for Canon David. We are a diverse diocese with parishes ranging from fairly large to pretty small, and urban to rural, and somewhat young to quite aged. What specific skills do you bring that you'll use to help us grow our ministries and sustain financial viability?
We've obviously been reflecting on these questions for a while because we've had them for a while, and I'm intrigued by how I know this is developing in my own mind over the course of this week as we have these questions, but in actual conversation with the people of the diocese. And as I've thought about this question about skills that would help to grow the ministries in the diocese, which is to say what happens in the front line of the church's ministry, which is what happens in parishes and outreach programs, I've really begun to think that our skills arise from a combination of things. They arise from the gifts that God gives to each of us, appointing to each one different gifts. They come from our experience over time, and they come from our passions, the places that our energies are drawn from. And as I have heard this question and thought again about how it highlights the diversity within the Diocese of Central Pennsylvania, I'm struck by the way that it connects to the experience of my ordained ministry, which has been in 3 different dioceses in 3 different parts of the country, but in parishes large and small, relatively urban, rural, well-resourced, not well-resourced. And I know from that variety of experience that there are no magic pills out there. No magic pills that will cause growth as though it was a just add water sort of sponge thing. But what I know is that the encouragement and the formation of community lies at the heart of the church's ministry. And as I've thought about my own ministry in connection to that, and really thought about my passions for ministry, I see them in a couple of different areas. One having to do with pastoral care. The pastoral care, in this case, as putatively as your bishop, the pastoral care of the clergy and lay leaders of the diocese and their spouses and partners. Something that I love to engage in. One of the joys of the work I've been doing in the Diocese of Milwaukee has been to be a pastoral presence with those who work in the church. I know what it's like to be on the front line of the church's ministry, and I have a real appreciation, I think, for the joys that brings, but I also know the challenges and the loneliness that that can bring. And I know how important it is to have somebody who comes and says to you, let's have a cup of coffee and tell me how it is with your soul. Or maybe let's just have a cup of coffee and sit here and have a good cry. Now, how does that connect to the growth of ministry? I think it connects to the growth of ministry because those who are doing the work in the congregations and in the communities need themselves to be cared for and to be nurtured and to be formed and to be loved and to be encouraged. And those are gifts or skills that I see as I look at my own life and my own ministry. Encouragement, care, formation. We are in a time of tremendous change in the life of the church, and we all know that. Sometimes it's the elephant in the room and we don't talk about it, and sometimes it's the elephant in the room and we do talk about it. But we know that things are going to have to be different in the Episcopal Church as we move forward into the future, doing whatever it is that God is calling us to do. I love the tradition in which we worship. But I also believe that tradition is a living thing. And I believe that part of what we as the Episcopal Church have to offer to the world is a willingness to say, we bring an ancient tradition with a fresh look. Much as I love the tradition from which we have come, I'm also willing and, in some sense, pleasantly or happily anxious, happily looking forward to the future as we find different ways to be the Episcopal Church, recognizing that some of the structures that have supported us for so long are no longer sustainable or viable or appropriate. So it comes back to community. How do we, as communities of faith, impact the communities in which we find ourselves? We do that through intention, we do that through caring for each other, and we do that through constantly being formed in our faith. In terms of viability and questions of finance, really what I think I would say in that regard is that I think anything having to do with common finance must be grounded in absolute transparency. I can't print money any more than you can print money. But I believe that God has given us what is needed to do what God wants us to do. What we make of that, how we divide that, is a conversation that we need to have ongoing in the life of the church, and we need to be completely transparent about it. I am not interested only in viability, but I'm interested in vitality. And I want to work with people of faith who are anxious to use God's gifts to us, not just to remain for another generation, but to move with vitality and vigor and faith into the future.
Question number 2. How would you strengthen communications between the diocese and congregations, among congregations, and between you as bishop and the clergy?
As I joked last night, I'm not sure that's fair. That's 3 questions in one. But to pick up where I just left off, community doesn't happen without good communication. And in my mind, there's a big difference between the transmission of information and true communication. The transmission of information lets you know when the spaghetti dinner or the Lenten program is going to happen or not going to happen. And it doesn't involve much mutuality. We have a lot of wonderful ways at our disposal that we can transmit information. From our face-to-face conversations in church, to Facebook, to email, to newsletters, you name it. We have lots of ways to transmit information. But to communicate calls us to be in community. I have a vision of a diocese which does not see at its center the bishop's office and all the congregations forming the rim around the outside of a wheel. I have a somewhat more horizontal view, where instead of feeling that all communication needs to go through the person and or the office of the bishop, that communication can go side to side to side. One of the things that's been really exciting in Milwaukee that we've done in the last 10 years has been something called the Church Development Institute, CDI. It's not unique to us. It was developed in other parts of the church, and it has been redeveloped in a wonderful way to be used in a diocesan context. And yes, it brings together clergy and lay leadership teams from the congregations of the diocese, and they learn some useful skills that have to do with leadership in congregations. But what I think the real positive impact has been is that it's finally got people talking to each other. It's finally gotten leaders of congregations to see their neighbors as co-workers in the vineyard and not as competition for pledging units. Yes, if I were your bishop, I would certainly encourage the use of the modern technology we have, but it cannot and it will not ever replace the kind of communication which comes out of community. So I would be looking for opportunities to encourage the congregations of the diocese to find ways to work together. Maybe there has to be a little financial carrot. I have this crazy idea of maybe saying, the diocese will put up $5,000. I know that's easy for me to say. The diocese will put up $5,000 as a grant for ministry, but 3 congregations have to get together and dream it up and make the application and carry out that ministry. Make the money easy to get, but make sure that you get people working together to utilize those assets to make a dream a reality. Communication with the clergy is a critical part of the bishop's pastoral responsibility. And as I said in my answer to the first question, I would want to be spending a lot of time with you. I hope you would see that as a gift and not a threat. Clergy gatherings are important, and they have a place, and I would want to encourage them as means of being formed and supported in ministry. But I also think that we need to find opportunities to be together as the ordained leaders of the church for slightly longer periods of time. And I imagine, at least early on in my years as a bishop, were that to be God's call for me, having a series of overnight sort of 24-hour events at which small groups of clergy and their spouses or partners would be invited to come, and we would meet at some mutually convenient place, and we'd spend 24 hours together in prayer and in study and in being silly and in taking some recreation together, finding out about each other in ways that perhaps when we only get together to talk shop, we never really uncover. If you build the communication, if you build the relationship when the going is good, when things get difficult, as they inevitably do in any human endeavor, it is so much easier then to have good communication even when things are getting hot. Good communication can, among other things, avoid the extreme divisiveness that we see in our culture and even sometimes in our church. I think communication, community, can keep us from demonizing the other, but seeing in the other the face of Christ. and being drawn back again into community with that person. Community, communication, they are two sides of the same whole.
What have been your experiences with vocational deacons, and how do you envision using the deacons for serving parishes and/or the diocese?
Excuse me, that was not very socially acceptable, but I was getting dry in the throat. In each of the dioceses that I've served, those dioceses have been enriched by the presence and the ministry of deacons. And I think that the reclamation of the full and equal order of the diaconate as a critical part of the life of the Episcopal Church is one of the most exciting things that's happened to us in the last 50 or so years. I think it has helped reconnect us to the fundamental mission of the church, which is to be about offering God's reconciling love to those who are not in the church, but who find themselves out in the world, often in the most marginal of places, and looking for that good news which we have to offer. I am 100% in favor of the ministry of deacons. I want deacons to be well-formed. I want deacons to be well-placed. I want deacons to be well-supported. I don't want deacons to be seen as cheap clerical help. Too often, I think, in congregations where money gets tight, an idea pops into somebody's mind, well, we really can't afford much by way of clergy, but maybe we can get the bishop to send us a deacon and then we'll be okay. That is not what deacons are ordained to do. My view, my hope, my vision for the diaconate is one that is sort of more catalytic, one where we take a deacon who has a particular passion for a particular issue, and we work with congregations to find out what communities perhaps share that passion or are in a place where that issue is a particular reality, and then to match those two together for a season of time when the deacon brings his or her passion and experience and helps to plant that ministry in that congregation. Get the roots good and deep and well fed, form the people of the congregation to continue the ministry, and then the deacon leaves and goes somewhere else to do that work in another place. In that way, it seems to me, deacons support both important congregational ministry, but also are seen as serving in a diocesan capacity. And they can help bring us together as a more tightly knit diocesan family. I think that deacons also play an iconic role for us, and that's a word that I take seriously. I dabble in painting icons or writing icons, and I take icons and their use very seriously. But I think that deacons can be iconic. I think they are iconic in terms of their liturgical presence with us and what it does for us as the church. They stand in our midst and they read the gospel. They bring the word into our lives. Deacons gather together the intercessory concerns of the community and help to serve kind of as the conscience that pricks us when we get too comfortable, that reminds us of the things and the people and the places and the issues and the causes about which we need to be praying. And they set the table for the Eucharist. And in that table setting, I think they embody for us that fundamental part of Jesus' ministry, which was a ministry not of being served, but of serving others. Deacons remind us that as baptized Christians, as followers of Jesus, as those who seek to walk in his image, we are called first and foremost to be servants, and oftentimes servants of the least among us. It's easy to say, it's harder to do. Part of the gift of the diaconate is that they are living and present reminders that that is who and what we are called to be. God bless them, and let's treat them with the greatest of respect, the greatest of encouragement, and the greatest of gratitude for what they're willing to share with us.
At this time, Canon Pfaff will answer the question that he's chosen to answer.
Can you read question 5?
Certainly. Question 5. Now that same-sex marriages are legal in Pennsylvania, would you as bishop support the clergy officiating or performing such marriages rather than only blessing them?
I want to start my answer to that question by being very clear that I'm 100% in favor of the full inclusion of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgendered, all of God's creatures in the life and in the full ministry of the Episcopal Church. We have had a wonderful witness, at least in parts, to the importance of the gifts that LGBT people have brought to the church, and we will continue to do that. I'm struck by the irony that when the General Convention met in 2012 and struggled with and approved the provisional right for the blessing of same-gender unions, we thought we were ahead of the curve. 2 years ago, there is no way we could have predicted that we would find ourselves as the church behind the curve. But legally, the landscape has changed so much. So many jurisdictions now allow for the marriage of two people of the same gender. And so rather than being ahead of the issue, we're now racing to catch up. I believe that in the church's theology of marriage, we can easily find a place which says marriage can be between two loving people regardless of their gender. But we are also a people who follow rules. And for us to get to the place of saying we will marry a couple who are not of opposite genders is to disregard two of our constitutional documents, the Book of Common Prayer and the canons of the Church. Now, what I think we need to do is to make sure that we, and we are a representative church, go about the process of changing the wording of the prayer book, changing the wording of the canons, so that we can be authentic and consistent in saying, yes, this is part of the life and theology of our church, and we are going to stand proudly with our doors open and make that known. I don't want to sound like I'm overly Germanic by saying, well, we got to follow the rules. But if we start disregarding the rules, no matter how right the issue is, I fear we start ourselves down a slippery slope that perhaps we don't want to go down. We have the means at our disposal to bring about changes to the prayer book, to bring about changes to the canons, so that we are congruent in what we say and what we believe and what we do. If we can do that, I absolutely want to support the priests of the diocese in carrying out that which is the sacramental and pastoral life of the Episcopal Church for all people. Sorry.
At this point, we will open the floor to questions for Canon Pfaff, and I ask that the questions be concise and that they relate to being the Bishop of Central Pennsylvania. And we have 6 extra minutes. We have 6 extra minutes. Thank you.
Could I ask a question just to follow up on what you said, David? Just so, and I thank you for your words about same-sex marriage and your commitments. Given the fact that our current bishop permits the clergy to perform same-sex marriage, is it your position that you would suspend that practice until such a time as the words of the prayer book would be revised?
The question that Father Richard is asking is based on what I was just saying a few minutes ago about the marriage of people of the same gender, given the fact that the current bishop authorizes the marriage of those couples in the church. Would I suspend that? And the answer to that question is, Richard, no. Now you're going to say, well, he's being woefully inconsistent. I am not, despite how it may have sounded, I'm not a doctrinaire sort of person. And I believe that that's a conversation that we would need to have as a community of clergy and as a community of clergy and lay together. What I want to be clear about is that you understand that I'm a person who believes that the church is here for all people, but I'm also a person who values the way we have commonly agreed to live in the documents that we have commonly adopted as being the things which mark us as the Episcopal Church. Question, and I've been asked to repeat them for the sake of the people who are watching the live stream and may not be able to hear, is, and if I don't get it right, you say it again and I'll say it again. How do I view the work of the bishop in terms of ecumenical relationships and also interfaith relationships? Is that right? Okay. And I think it's important to make a distinction between ecumenical and interfaith relationships. Not because I think one is more important than the other, but when we talk about ecumenical relationships, we are talking about relationships within the larger Christian body. And when we talk about interfaith relationships, we are talking not about our relationship with the Presbyterians, but our relationship with the Jewish community and the Hindu community and the Muslim community, and the communities of other distinct faith traditions. I think the bishop has an important role to play in that, because those conversations need again to rise out of a sense of community. And my experience in watching and in participating in ecumenical and interfaith dialogue, which I've done a fair amount of in Milwaukee, which has a fairly active landscape for that kind of work, is that when the leaders of the faith community work at having good relationships, ones of mutual respect and understanding and inquiry, then the people who sit in our churches, our mosques, our synagogues are hungry to work together for the betterment of the world. There's nothing magical about being the bishop, but I think the bishop does represent the Episcopal Church in that ecumenical setting. And the Episcopal bishop may well be the person in the larger Christian community who represents the Christian community in the interfaith context. Because frankly, some of our brother and sister traditions, I think, are not as willing to sit down with those of other faiths and say, I want to know about your faith. I want to know who you are as a spiritual person. Again, it's part of what we offer to the world as the Episcopal Church. I see the bishop as a point person, but not as the only person involved, because at the end of the day, real ecumenical work, real ecumenical fruit, and real interfaith fruit is born at the congregational community level. And anything that I can do to promote and support that, I certainly would. Heavens. Yes, sir.
Anthony Brillo. I doubt that the apostles would fare well going through the gauntlet of finding a rector, let alone a bishop. What are your two greatest strengths that you bring? What are your two greatest liabilities, weaknesses? And what are the two things that you most prefer to do?
Most prefer to do?
Prefer to do.
Oh, okay. Yeah. The question is basically, what do I see my two greatest strengths to be, what do I see my two greatest weaknesses to be, and what are two things that I prefer to do? In terms of strengths, and it's always easier to start with one's strengths than with one's weaknesses, I think that's the human condition. My capacity to build community, my capacity to bring people together and to call out the gifts that they bring in new and exciting ways. Not that I'm doing new and exciting things, but that I'm helping others to do the things that God has gifted them to be able to do. Why I'm able to do that, I can't exactly tell you, but you've certainly heard me say the word community enough tonight that I hope you know that I mean it, and that I'm all about trying to build collaborative community, because that, I believe, is where the Christian faith is rooted. Formation, teaching, instructing, which at the end of the day is really nothing more than sharing the faith that we have within us. I love to do that. And there are those who say I'm an okay teacher. Not that it's got to be a large data dump, but rather I love sharing the story of our faith, the story of our tradition, and inviting other people into the conversation to reflect on that and to offer their own experience and their own thoughts. In terms of my weaknesses, I'm tempted to say they are too many to number, but that would be dodging the question. There are those who will say that I'm not a great fan of conflict. And at some level, I think that that's true. But what I believe is that we sometimes engage in conflict for conflict's sake. And I have no time for that, and I have no interest in it. What I hope we do is, on the front end, build the relationships which allow us in the church and in the larger community to have differing opinions about things and yet not allow that to tear us apart. So am I trying to talk myself out of an aversion to conflict? Perhaps I am, and perhaps that delusion is a weakness on which I need to work. But I do also believe that we have almost made an idol out of conflict, and that's a very dangerous thing for us. I need people to tell me when enough is enough, which is to say, I need people to tell me when to stop and to rest, to take care of myself, to tend to my own spiritual needs. Thankfully, I have a wife who's very good at doing that. And I have friends and colleagues who are good at doing that. Folks, I'm deadly serious about this. I mean, a bishop's life is no fun whatsoever. I mean, there are a few fun things, but the days are long and grueling and lonely. And it is very easy, I think, for a bishop to quickly become burnt out and disillusioned, and the whole ministry loses its vitality. So I need people to continue to help me stay balanced. What do I prefer to do? I prefer to be with people where they are, participating in what they're doing, and sharing in their joy in doing that. I mean, if I have to make a decision between spending a day in the office writing letters and spending a day going to visit the parish in Lock Haven on a Tuesday afternoon to be there to see what happens in their feeding program, that's what I will prefer to do. Will I always be able to? No, but you can bet your bottom dollar that my preference will be to be with the people of the diocese. Second preference, you're talking about in my personal life or professionally? Either way. I'm trying to think of something juicy. This is going to sound contradictory to what I just said a few minutes ago, but I prefer to be alone sometimes. I am aware of the importance of being alone sometimes. And I try to be intentional about being alone for periods of time. Being alone and being lonely are two very different sorts of things, and I will never prefer to be lonely. But there are times when I will certainly need to be by myself. I think Jesus had to do that, and I think it's very good for us to take time to be still and to listen, not to talk, just to listen, to be alone and to be silent. Two minutes, the 2-minute warning. The question, if I understand it, is what are my thoughts about adult formation, be they gender-based things like the Daughters of the King, or programs like EFM, Education for Ministry, or other things, and what thoughts do I have about promoting those around the diocese? Anything that people will do as adults to continue to wrestle with their faith as a lifelong adventure, I want to support and encourage. And I don't care whether it's done all men, all women. There are times I think when the genders do probably need to have conversations of a spiritual kind discreetly to themselves, because men and women are not identical, and our experience of the holy is not identical. So if you want to be a daughter of the King, I want to support you in that, and there is nothing more wonderful than supporting people whose ministry is prayer for others. In terms of education for ministry, in terms of other things perhaps through the Stevenson School for Ministry that could be developed and offered across the diocese, I'm 100% in favor of trying to establish those, promote them, and get them going. I think we have to be realistic about what we can do and perhaps say, we're going to try one initiative for this year and really try to get that going. And then we'll take another initiative in the next year to really focus the energy and the efforts and the resources of the diocese so that we are not paying lip service to what we're doing, but we're really being serious and intentional about it. I know that sometimes the topography and the weather and life get in the way, and it's hard to bring people together. Perhaps one of the things we need to do is to look at how we're using technology as part of the Stevenson School to draw people together for formation opportunities. You can't do all of your schooling online, but I think you can do some of it, and we should explore that. And I'm glad you're asking the question.
Thank you, Canon Pfaff and Emily. Another 5-minute break, quick one, so that we can move ahead.
Not this time of year. Wait until summer.
We are ready to continue. Please be seated. Please be seated. I'm very honored to present to you at this time the Reverend Canon Audrey Scanlon. We are a diverse diocese with parishes ranging from fairly large to pretty small, and urban to rural, and somewhat young to quite aged. What specific skills do you bring that you will use to help us grow our ministries and sustain financial viability?
Do-si-do. Here we go. How's everyone doing? All right? This is a long night, and I am very appreciative of your patience and your attention. And I would ask if you would indulge me in just a moment of prayer. The Lord be with you. Also with you. Let us pray. God, we know that you are with us in this evening, and we bid your continued presence among us, and most especially the opening of our hearts to your word in this time. Help us to hear your voice speak to us. Help us to discern what is next. Amen. I have a great appreciation for the three questions which have somehow come up as the top three questions for us to answer that you are eager to hear about. And I would say that these are what I call front burner questions. I am a cook. Spent the first 10 years out of college actually cooking. That's what a bachelor's degree in psychology gets you. And so in the cooking industry, or maybe even just in your home kitchen, you know that if something's on the front burner, it means you pay attention to it. It's not a stock pot on the back burner that can sit while you go about your business, but these are important things. And so this is an important set of questions that you offered us. And I noticed two things in the first question. The first part is that you are celebrating, you're acclaiming and celebrating the fact that you are a diverse diocese, rural and urban and small and large and young and aged. And I want to affirm that and say that that has also been my experience in the diocese in which I serve in Connecticut, that we too have large and small churches, urban and rural churches. And yet, 2 weekends ago, my husband and I came on a little stealth mission to central Pennsylvania, and we drove all over the state. We drove 1,000 miles in 3 days. And we started in Lancaster, and then we went to Gettysburg, and then we came up to State College. We had to see the hockey rink because my husband is a former hockey coach. And then it was a beautiful rink. We saw both of them, actually. And then we went to Williamsport, and we went to Harrisburg. We were all over the place. And what I noticed was, yes, you have this wild and beautiful diversity in your congregations and in your landscape. What is very different to me is the fact that you could probably fit 2 or 3 dioceses of Connecticut inside the Diocese of Central Pennsylvania. And so what I'm learning is one of the challenges, what I'm coming to appreciate, is the challenge of space for you as a diocese. In terms of what are the skills that I bring to you, these are skills that are born of experience that I've acquired in my years of ordained ministry, but also in my professional life as well, in other careers. The first group of skills that I bring are the skills of a congregational development missioner. And I work with congregations in all areas of all parts of their life cycle, from emerging new communities and missional experiments, as we call them in Connecticut, to congregations at the end of their life cycle that need particular pastoral care and help in taking what for them is very much a Good Friday experience and finding the resurrection moment in the ending of a particular church. A lot of the work that I've been doing in congregational development has been focused on the idea of collaboration. That's why I'm called the Canon for Mission, God's Mission Collaboration. And in Connecticut, a lot of that work is naturally geared towards opening your red door and looking out and seeing your Episcopal neighbor not very far down the road, in some cases just a couple of miles down the road. And in the 3.5 or 4 years that I've been doing this job, besides getting Episcopal congregations to talk to each other, we're expanding our ministry to say, how about the other Christian folks in town, the other mainline denominations? And what would it look like if we started talking to our interfaith neighbors? We have a wonderful Christian-Muslim conversation that's going on right now in Connecticut in 3 or 4 spots. And then we broaden the scope even more, and now we're saying, what would it look like if we engaged people in the civic community in our work together? And so this idea of collaboration is very important to me. And I suspect that it might be something we could do together here as well. I have the skills of an entrepreneur. In my time between cooking in a restaurant and becoming a priest, I spent some time as an entrepreneur, beginning 2 different 501c3 nonprofit organizations. And so I know what it is to do vision casting. I know about strategic planning and development. I know the importance of setting benchmarks and evaluating program. And so those skills, I think, are important to the church today. Also, in my work in Connecticut, I've been working to coordinate a team of financial coaches as we have developed a system of financial analysis and work with congregations that are particularly challenged, so they can have some guidance about what makes the most sense for them to pursue with limited energy and limited resources in bringing about financial viability. And then finally, I have the gift of, and don't all run out the door, I have the gift and the experience of being what I call a modern, sensible evangelist. Evangelism gets kind of a bad rap sometimes in the Episcopal Church. Sometimes we don't talk about it at all, and other times we think of evangelism as being a kind of a Bible-thumping experience. The kind of evangelism that I'm interested in is learning in helping people learn how to tell their story, to claim their own personal spiritual story, to articulate that story, and then use it as a point of connection in building relationships with other people. It's really a very effective way of bringing Christ to the world. That's number 1.
How would you strengthen communication between the diocese and congregations, among congregations, and between you as bishop and the clergy?
This question reminds me of the parable about keeping your light under a bushel. And it's something that we're pretty good at doing, aren't we? I know that I get very excited when I'm working about developing program and about, I get really excited in making things come alive, and then sometimes I'm at fault because I forget to tell people about it outside of the little circle with which I'm working. So communication in everything that we do is so important, so vital. There's some principles of good communication that I'd like to share with you that I've developed in my time, and I would like to remind us of them. The first is, I think, good communication is frequent and it's varied. So we all know that it takes, 7 times at least for someone to hear and digest a message, right? And it's important also to deliver that message in a different way for different learning styles. I have a ministry in which I work with children with special needs, and I work with children on the autism spectrum, some of whom have receptive language difficulties, and many of whom have expressive language difficulties or challenges. And so I know from an educator's perspective how important it is to offer my message to them in many different ways. And quite frankly, that's true for all of us, that some of us are kinesthetic learners, some of us are visual learners, some of us are auditory learners. And so good communication is frequent and it's varied. It's also two-way. And I want you to know this about the kind of bishop that I would like to be is a bishop who values hearing from her people. Not just clergy, but from everybody. One of the practices that I'm trying to develop in my own spiritual life and my prayer life is the practice of contemplative prayer. And contemplative prayer or centering prayer is hard for me, because it means you sit down and you be quiet and you listen and you receive God's word to you. I think that that's an important skill for all of us, certainly for a bishop. Another principle of communication that is important to me is that communication is direct. Anybody who served on a vestry knows about something that we call a parking lot meeting. It usually happens after the vestry meeting. That's not a very direct form of communication, and so to me, direct communication means sometimes saying the hard thing in a hard way, not in a hard, bad way, but saying the hard thing when it needs to be said to people in a direct way. That's important to me. Equally important is understanding what we're communicating. What are we talking about? For me, in the church, we are talking about fulfilling the mission of God, being people who are participating in God's mission, being disciples of Jesus, following Jesus, and understanding what that means in our individual lives, and what does that mean as part of communities in which we are shaped and formed. One of the things that I would love to do in the Diocese of Central Pennsylvania is not come in as a bishop with a formed vision who's going to charge in and say, here's what we're doing, but as a bishop who would come in and invite conversation and listen and work with you to form a shared purpose, a shared vision together. In that way, we can all be invested. We can use our gifts to create this together, to understand how the Diocese of Central Pennsylvania is able to step into doing God's good work. And then thirdly, for me, what's important about communication is understanding that we have a very broad audience. Sometimes, if we do pick up that bushel basket and let the light shine, sometimes it's only in an intra-episcopal way. And these days, in a culture in which we are increasingly secular, some would call it the era of post-Christendom, it's more and more important and more a challenge, and for me, more exciting to share the work that we're doing in a very broad context, in our local community and across the world. Thank you.
What have been your experiences with vocational deacons, and how do you envision using the deacons for serving parishes and/or the diocese?
I have an interesting experience with vocational deacons that I would like to share with you, and it is that I wanted to be a vocational deacon, and I got very close to actually becoming a vocational deacon. So I'd like to tell you a little bit of that story. I was working at an elementary school, working in the guidance department, and I was leading a program called PAL, P-A-L, Promoting Affective Learning. I was working with a population of children that were really came from a tough place, tough homes, and were having a difficult time in school being good cooperative classmates. And so these children were selected by their classroom teacher to come and work with me on skills of cooperative play and all sorts of things. We were having a wonderful time in this program, but as you can imagine, in an elementary school, it was a pre-K to third grade school, I only got to see each of these students once a week for half an hour. At the same time, I was directing the Sunday school, the Christian formation program at my home parish in Collinsville, and I got this idea that it would be a good thing if I brought these two things together. So what would it look like if I brought the children from school to the church? So I started my first 501c3, and I built this program, which 18 years later still continues today, I'm happy to say. And we got teen mentors, and we got senior volunteers, and we brought these kids over from school, and we created a play environment which was different than any daycare you'd ever seen, because we taught the children how to knit, and we did cooperative games together. They hated it, but I made them play a group game every day, because I thought that was an important skill-building opportunity. And at some point in this ministry of mine that I had created, I thought, I think we need to put a collar on this. And boy, was I wrong, right? But I pursued this call to the diaconate, because a deacon is one who lifts up the lonely and the oppressed and the downtrodden and the underserved and the people who are left out. And I thought, this is what I'm supposed to do. So I went through this long training program, and I finally got in front of the Commission on Ministry, and they said, gee, you know, you're doing great work, and we're hearing something very different from you. We're hearing a gift of creating community, which is a priestly gift. And we're hearing that you have a sacramental urge, which is a priestly thing to do, to celebrate the sacraments. So we'd like you to go home for a year and think about it, and then maybe think about going to seminary. And so I did go home for a year, and I thought about it, and I did go to seminary. And so I know what it is to have some of the gifts of a deacon, and all of the baptized are called to have those gifts of a deacon, which are to have a servant heart. A servant heart is part of being a disciple of Jesus. And yet, a deacon is a little different, because a deacon has a servant heart, but also the skills of leadership to empower that work in a congregation or in a diocese or in a community. So that's what a deacon is. What a deacon isn't, in my opinion, a deacon is not a junior priest who hands out reserved sacrament. I know that some dioceses do that, but a deacon has a particular charism and calling. A deacon is also not the only one in a church to do outreach ministry. I've seen in my diocese sometimes we'll put a deacon in a parish, and the parish thinks, oh, we have a deacon now, and they step back. And indeed, a deacon is there to encourage and help to facilitate God's good work. So how would I use these deacons? Well, Bishop Geppert has kind of beat me to the punch on this one, I'll be honest with you, in some of the recent things that I've read about deacons that are happening here, and I think they're very good. First of all, I would use deacons in their traditional parish setting, because everything that a deacon does in liturgy is a mirror to the role that they serve in the world. So as a deacon reads the gospel in the center aisle, they're proclaiming the good news, and that's what a deacon does in the world. A deacon bids the prayers of the people, or sometimes even leads them. And a deacon's job is to interpret the world to the church and the church to the world. A deacon sets the table, and that harkens back to the biblical precedent of Stephen, our first deacon, who was selected to serve at table. And then I think the most important thing a deacon does is to send us out into the world, to serve God. So that traditional liturgical parish-based role of a deacon is important. I have two other ideas, and these are the ones that Bishop Gebhardt has been talking about too. One is to serve regionally. I wonder what it would look like to take a deacon and to put a deacon in a community in central Pennsylvania that does not have an Episcopal church. What would it look like to assign a deacon to a community and say, you don't need 4 walls and a steeple and some red doors to do God's work. You can do it right there in the town square. I think that's an exciting possibility. And then finally, and again, this is something that's already happening, a recent development here, is the idea of using a deacon based on his or her particular charism or skill. So if you have a deacon who's gifted in feeding ministries or ministry with the aged or ministry with children with special needs, wouldn't it be wonderful to share that gift and their experience around the diocese, moving from place to place to celebrate and to share that good work? So those are some of the ideas that I have. They're certainly not all original, but I think that they are important ones.
At this time, the canon will choose a question from our list and give you her answers for that.
I'd love to keep you here all night and answer all the rest of these questions, but I don't think that would be very popular. So I'm going to select question number, let's see, what is it? Number 6, and it says this. It says, in what ways do you see the Diocese of Central Pennsylvania being more involved both prayerfully and spiritually in our communities? So how are we going to be more involved prayerfully and spiritually in our communities? And I want to say, first of all, I understand community to be the civic sector, not simply church community. This is a leading edge for us in the church today. As I said earlier, this part about post-Christendom and the increasingly secular society in which we live. When I grew up, every Sunday morning we got out of bed and we slapped on our white tights and our patent leather shoes, and off we marched to church. And I was in the junior choir at St. James in Farmington, Connecticut, and I was furious. I used to sit there fuming because my brothers, my 2 brothers, one is 2 years older and one's 2 years younger, they would have spent the entire morning complaining because they had to serve as acolytes. I was a girl. This was before the days when we allowed girls inside the altar rail. Thankfully, the church has changed a bit since then. And yet, some of that change says that it is not an automatic response for us to get up on a Sunday morning and go to church. So, part of the challenge and part of the responsibility that we have is to step into the town square. Let me tell you quickly a story that, this is what we call a negative example story about something I did that was not so smart. When I was the rector of St. Gabriel's in East Berlin, Connecticut, it was a tiny little family-sized church. I served as the rector of 2 family-sized churches at the same time, and they each shared me 50-50. And one of the churches was literally falling apart, St. Gabriel's, and so we had to take a bulldozer to it. And there was a day when I arrived at church, and I opened the church door, and I looked in, and there was a giant hole in the ground, and a bulldozer in the middle of it. And I thought, okay, I guess we're going to do this. I guess we're going to rebuild the church. And it took us about a year. We had Christmas, we had Advent and Christmas in the parish hall. We had Epiphany in the parish hall. We had Lent and Easter in the parish hall. And finally, we got to Pentecost, and it was time to move back into the church. It had all been restored, new floor, new footings. Everything was great. I got the bishop's calendar, the bishop on the calendar. I dialed up something called Bagpipes Are Us, and I got a bagpiper. And we had this wonderful celebration to rededicate the church. And here's where I blew it. We marched out the front door, this little procession with a crucifer and the bagpiper and the bishop and the whole congregation, and we marched to the end of the driveway. And then we marched down across the front lawn, and then we marched down to the back part of the yard where the church was, and around the back, and then back up the side driveway, and we went inside the front door, the bagpiper playing the whole time, and we slammed the front door shut, and we celebrated Eucharist. We blew it. Here's what we should have done. We should have walked down the driveway, walked down Main Street, walked past the deli, walked past the post office, gone across the park, gone in front of the school, brought people along the way and invited them to come in the church with the doors open to join us. I think metaphorically that's what we're being called to do today, because people are not coming in our doors as readily as they used to. I want to tell you about 3 other quick things that we're doing in Connecticut that I find very exciting ways of opening this conversation about being prayerful and spiritual in the community. And you know how in, is it the 3 Bears where they've got the little chair, the medium chair, and the big chair? Well, I want to tell you a little story, a medium story, and a big story. The big story, we'll start there, the big chair, is that we are in the process of planning for our clergy renewal of vows, in which we will be making a public witness in Hartford, which is our state capital. And rather than closing ourselves into the cathedral and having our chrism mass to celebrate the renewal of vows on Holy Tuesday, what we're doing is having a big celebration in a park in the center of the city where we will renew our baptismal vows, and we will have communion together, and anybody on the street is welcome to join us for this. It will be a giant feast, including food as well as Eucharistic food. And then we're going to send our clergy out to, they get to choose one of 5 different places in our city that they would like to visit to celebrate the work that these places are doing, these institutions are doing, to create common good for people. So we're sending folks to the hospital. We're sending people to the library. We're sending people to the community college. We're sending people to the soup kitchen at our cathedral. So we can lift up in prayer and as public witness the fact that our communities are celebrating and working hard for the common good. And we want to support that as a faith community. So that's the big chair story. The medium chair story is something that I've been doing for a couple of years now, and we call them community meetings. We've done them first as a way to discern what to do with empty properties that we have, but now I'm encouraging all faith congregations to do these things. So we get the social service director of the town, we get the superintendent of schools, the police chief, the housing authority, the mayor, anybody we can think of, the neighbors, and we invite them in for an evening of conversation in the church, and we ask 3 questions. We say, what are the blessings of being in this community? And they tell us all the blessings. And then we say, what are the challenges? And they tell us the challenges. And then we say, what are the growing trends? What's happening here? What do you see developing? This is a process for us of very deep listening. Deep listening is the church of being engaged with community. But what we often hear, and this is a sort of a side benefit really for the participants, we get about 50 people in the room, is the cross conversation. I have lots of people come up to me at the end of the night and say, you know, nobody's ever asked us to be in the same room together to have this kind of conversation without judgment. That means I'm done? That means 1 minute. Okay. They're very discreet. They're great. These are really important community conversations we're having, and so I'm encouraging and training people in all different kinds of congregations, not just ones who are in discernment about what do we do with the rectory or the empty parish house, to use those. And then finally, let me tell you quickly, this is the little chair story about how I've taken people out from my old church in Church of Our Savior in Plainville, octogenarians who came out with me to the grocery store. And the idea was, how do we become more relevant in the community? And so we set up a table outside the grocery store, kind of like this one, but we didn't have any cookies on it. We had a basket and some empty pieces of paper and some pencils. And we said to folks as they came out with their grocery shopping, we said, you know, tomorrow we're going to be in church. What would you like us to pray for in your life? And we invited prayer requests from folks. Not only did our basket fill up, some people actually tried to give us money, which I thought was interesting. There were some folks who wanted to have us pray with them right there, which was amazing. And not only did we then fold those prayers into the prayers of the people the next day, but what we found was it was a wonderful way to strengthen the faith of the people who were actually doing it from our church. It was a real bold experiment for them, and they were very brave, and it was amazingly successful. And so that's the little chair story, which I guess when I think about it now isn't that little. Thank you.
At this time, we'll open the floor for questions for the canon. I ask that you please stand up and say your name. Please ask your question concisely and in a loud voice.
I'm Jim Jackson, St. John's Episcopal, Bellefonte. The other two candidates have answered question number 5. I'd be interested in your comments on that. Thank you.
Sure. Let's see what 5 is. Now that same-sex marriages are legal in Pennsylvania, would you as bishop support the clergy in officiating/performing such marriages rather than only blessing them? That's the question. This is the first time I've gotten a chance to answer this question in the Walkabout, so I appreciate the fact that you've asked it. Thank you. I don't know what my cohorts have said. This is an issue in which I have been keenly aware since, honestly, since the day I was ordained. And I'll tell you why. Because at my diaconal ordination in Connecticut, we ordain what I call, irreverently, I call it a litter of ordinands. We ordain a litter of ordinands to the diaconate, and then later on, at an appropriate moment, we do individual priestly ordinations, generally 6 months to a year later. That's the canons dictate. So at my diaconal ordination at Christ Church Cathedral in Hartford, it was in June of 2003. Well, some of you who remember 2003 know that that was a key year for us in the church in learning about and talking about the issue of homosexuality and ordained life, and it came to a head that summer for us. This was just a month before General Convention. So there we were, nervous ordinands, and the bishop was there, and the cathedral must have had 400 or 500 people in it because there were 7 of us. 2 of my brothers and sisters among the ordained, to-be ordained colleagues were partnered and gay. One was a man, and one is a man, and one still is a woman. And so we got to that moment in the service. I don't know if you know this moment in the service, but we have a moment like this in the marriage service as well, where the bishop or the officiant says, if anybody knows a reason why this shouldn't continue, speak now or forever hold your peace. It doesn't say that exactly in the ordination service, but you know, that's the same sentiment. So at that moment, we were all standing up here, or kneeling or something, and a flood of about 50 people with their rector at the front came down the aisle. And this was a very conservative congregation who had prepared a statement and were protesting our ordination and demanded that the bishop stop it, because 2 of our colleagues were choosing to live in partnered gay relationships. The ordination went on after a time, and I have to tell you, it was one of the proudest moments of my life to be standing with my brothers and sisters in that church and having that moment go forward. So I guess I don't need to fast forward to tell you how I personally feel about the opportunity to be radically inclusive, not just of gay people in our church, but of all people in our church. And that, for me, includes all of the rites and rituals that we have in the church, including marriage. That said, you know, I'm not the king of the world, I'm not the queen of the world, I'm not even the bishop of central Pennsylvania, and I don't get to make the rules. We do have a general convention in which we have a legislative process. And so right now, the way that I understand it is that we have a blessing rite called I Will Bless You and You Will Be a Blessing. And it is an alternative rite that we use for marriage ceremonies in the church for people of same-sex marriages. In Connecticut, where same-sex marriage is legal from a state perspective, that's what we do. That's the authorized rite. We do it after a time of conversation in the church and building consensus and dialogue. And I'll tell you, even though it's probably technically not required to do that, having lived my entire ordained life in this understanding the tension, understanding that there are people who feel so differently than I do, that I respect the work that we do in having dialogue and in working together as people of God to come to an understanding, or at least an appreciation of each other's opinion. So right now, as it stands, General Convention has authorized this right for us to do same-sex marriages in the church. This year, just in a couple of months, as we get to our next General Convention, we will be receiving the report of the Task Force on Marriage, which has some new ideas for us about how we talk about marriage and how we understand marriage in our church. Not just in a state way, but in a liturgical way and in a theological way. And so one of the suggestions or recommendations that this task force is offering us is to consider using gender-neutral terms when we talk about marriage. I imagine this will be one of the more interesting conversations that we have at convention. And I'm looking forward to hearing it. I'm looking forward to reading the entire report of this task force on marriage, because I understand that it's more than that little nugget I've just shared with you. Personally, I think, and perhaps this is naive, I don't understand why we can't take a concept like marriage and broaden it. That's been my belief all along, is that we can broaden definitions of words. We can do that. And so that would be my hope and prayer in the future. Oh, it's too long on that one, wasn't it?
Thank you very much.
I thank you on behalf of the Transition Committee of the Diocese that you came tonight or that you watched on the live stream. It was very important for you to hear the wisdom of these three candidates. I would like to close tonight with a blessing by Father Wall.
Oh, let's stand up. The Lord be with you. And also with you. May God give you grace to take up your cross and follow Jesus in faith and hope and joy. And the blessing of God Almighty, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost be upon you and remain with you, tonight and always. Amen. Peace to love and serve the Lord.
Thanks be to God. John, are you getting any closer to calling the meeting? No?